I'm going to give quite a straightforward speech. I'll be using my notes. I'm going to stay on script, which is our first time for me. At the heart of the new OD is a change in how we talk and think about the world. We are still addicted to certainty and shouting, to being experts, to telling people how to do things. At the heart of my message today is the need to be less certain, less noisy about what we know. We need to be quieter. We need to be more doubtful. As the philosopher Socrates said, the only thing I know is I know nothing. The structure of the talk is quite straightforward. I'm going to introduce the core truth of the new DNA as I see it. I'm going to look and step back and see some of the truths that we've inherited and we still live with. I'm going to explore some of the weaknesses of that inheritance. And then I'll move on to the practical implications of all I've said in terms of what the new focus of OD needs to be and the new skills we require. The core truth of the new DNA is that we have to embrace living with many truths, many stories about ourselves and about the world at large. We have to embrace the diversity of how the world is known and experienced by people. This is much more than the diversity of race and gender. This is the diversity of the mind. I have a very good friend who went to facilitate a conference in India for a very large organization that you will have heard of. She was extremely excited when she arrived. She was, for instance, the only European in the room, and every color of skin in the world you can imagine was there. But she came to realize that everyone had been taught to think the same way. Everyone had been to the same elite graduate universities within the US. And within OD, we've also discouraged diversity of mind and truth. We have tried to make the diversity of the universe fit into our models, boxes, and labels, and have created a right way of talking about the world. At the organizational level, we've tried to define organizations around the goals of just one stakeholder group, often the shareholders, or around a single statement of vision, mission, or values. It is the denial of this diversity, of how the world is known, that leads to people being angry with each other, feeling excluded, feeling they have no voice. The imposition of a single truth gives a false but comforting sense of certainty and order, and often hides the self-interest of one section of society. This need to embrace a world of many truths is not a new perspective. Let me take you back 450 years and introduce you to the new guru of OD. His name is Michel de Montaigne. He was a French soldier, judge, landowner, and writer. He was also brought up to speak Latin as his mother tongue, despite living in France. So he was brought up to know difference, the world known through Latin and the world known through French. This wasn't just about language. It also ensured he had a living appreciation of a culture rooted in the past as well as one in the present. Let me tell you the sense I make of the quotation on the screen, starting from the top. Montaigne writes, "We are entirely made up of bits and pieces, woven together so diversely and so shapelessly that each of them pulls its own way at every moment. We are, in other words, full of history, voices, experiences. As one famous Turkish writer observed, when two people meet, it is like the meeting of two armies. Because we are made up of so many different parts, we carry so much baggage and range of personality." Michel de Montaigne, this new guru of OD, then spells out the consequence of this. And there is as much difference between us and ourselves as there is between us and other people. In other words, the external differences between people are less than the internal differences we have within us. Let me step back and explore where the need for this new DNA comes from. The truths about OD we've inherited which came about to meet the challenges of the past. The first part of our inheritance has been the drive to professionalize both management and OD, which has been happening over the last 50 to 75 years. Its goal has been to establish a body of documented knowledge about what good practice looks like. This came from a desire to move out of the age of folk memories and into the age of science, of method, and rigor. In this slide, I've pictured it as the moving from the age of leeches in medicine to the age of laboratories. The second part of our inheritance is about the people who provided us with this new scientific professional insight. They have mostly been men. They have mostly been from the US. They have mostly come from the Anglo-Saxon part of the US society. And they have been intellectually very clever. Here is a genuinely magnificent seven who represent this inheritance. On screen, you have Peter Drucker, Michael Porter, Dave Norton, Tom Peters, Gary Hamel, John Cotter, Peter Senge. You would not go far wrong reading their work, even now. But our inheritance is not just about who we learn from, but how we learned. We expected the wisdom of these great men to be handed down to us. They taught, we learned. Here's a picture of a lecture hall. I'm pretty sure from Harvard. Notice the style of the learning. The students are all focused on the professor. She is transmitting the wisdom of the elders to them. This value placed on handing down the teachings of wise men to students is informed by an assumption of universal truth, an assumption of predictability. Lessons can be learned and then applied elsewhere. A metaphor of engineering. OD is about implementing pre-thought and standardized designs, about imposing the single truth. Above all else, this inheritance has created a belief that there is one right way to do things, based on insights from the past, and assumes that this single right way applies to strategy, change, leading, learning, and behaving. There are, of course, weaknesses and strengths to this inheritance, and one of the key things is that every strength becomes a weakness when it is overplayed. Here are 5 of the weaknesses or overplayed strengths of our inheritance. There is too much wanting to be like physics, too much intellectual cleverness, too much pretending, too much focus on agreement, too much internal focus on OD. Let me expand and explain. Weakness 1, too much wanting to be like physics. We spend too much time measuring things, especially things that can be easily measured. We try to be objective about subjective experience. So we treat people, including ourselves, as things. We don't pay attention properly to what can't be meaningfully measured in the scientific way. We ignore love, we ignore hope, we ignore fear. It can be argued that there is no such thing, by which I mean a living social being, as an organization. Only people in relationships. Maybe we should stop calling ourselves organization developers and call ourselves relationship developers. Weakness 2, too much intellectual cleverness. We keep falling for the promises of the guys with the PhDs in maths. We keep trusting to equations and believing human behavior can be understood through models. So we keep getting long-term capital management, Enron, Lehman Brothers, and the polls that told us that Donald Trump would never be president and the UK would never leave the EU. Weakness 3, too much pretending. The book shown here is by the German writer Lars Wollmann. He argues that 90% of organizational activity has nothing to do with an organization's primary task. Modern work is like the theatre. It's a Broadway show, a performance. Everyone talks about work, but no work is done. We're too busy measuring, reporting, trying to understand why reality doesn't match the model, what we've been taught is the right way. We have mistaken the simplified map, the model of organizations, for the complex reality of life. Weakness 4, too much focus on agreement. We focus on creating a thin layer of shared understanding. All my research into conversations shows that people are very weak at exploring anything beyond a superficial understanding. We have lost the skill of expressing our differences constructively, which is why we now have so much training in having difficult conversations. In addition, leaders are blind to how their status and power encourages people to agree with them. And organizations are very skilled at pretending that everyone is singing with one voice, which encourages the culture of pretending that Lars Volmer writes about. Weakness 5, too much internal focus on OD. Any new professional body, which OD is, has to establish its identity. So it focuses on itself and excludes other disciplines. So it is not surprising that the world of OD can look like it is the whole world to us as practitioners. We need to be like that new guru of OD, Michel de Montaigne, who was a great intellectual traveler and embraced many different sources of wisdom. In OD, we need more philosophy, social biology, history, and we need less MBA. The great English management writer Charles Handy, who has already been referred to, knew this a long time ago. When he taught finance at the London Business School in the 1970s, he used to hand out texts of ancient Greek tragedy to go alongside the manuals on the rules of accounting. Let me now shift to looking at what the new focus of OD needs to be. For you and me, as OD professionals, we need to refocus onto 5 areas. We need to put greater emphasis on engaging with people's inner motivations, working with what already exists, working with hardwired social needs, containing anxiety, and hearing different points of view. Let me expand on each. Engaging with people's inner motivation means letting go of the excesses of behavioralism. It is the over-focus on visible behaviors that drives people to pretend, to put on an act, to please others with their appearance. The focus on the inner motivation means seeking to understand people's actual beliefs, not the corporate values, and working with the contradictions in their beliefs. It means taking the human body seriously as a source of data. We are, after all, heads and hearts and stomachs. We are not robots. It means accepting the limits to what can be controlled. As OD professionals, the more we seek to control people, the more we encourage them to lie and hide their secret desires and ambitions. Let me move on to the second focus. Working with what already exists means embracing the day-to-day, the ordinary. It is very easy to be swept away by the romance of some idealized future because it's so much less messy and complicated, which is why the grand plans of revolutionaries are so powerful. Working with what already exists is also about connecting OD into the roots of the organization. It means working with what is ordinary. The trouble with this is that you won't get invited to speak at places like Davos, which encourages people to feel special, not ordinary. OD that works with the idealized future will fail because it has no connection to what can actually succeed within the context of an organization's actual culture. You cannot import culture, as attempts to import US democracy into the Middle East show all too well. We have to work with hardwired social needs. If you speak to academics who study monkeys, they see people as monkeys with shoes on. They understand us as social mammals with needs that cannot be wished away by our recent intellectual development. Social mammals need hierarchy and continuity and time to show that they belong to the group. Social mammals can't cope with too much change. Gerhard Wilk, one of the authors of Living Leadership, believes that everyone in major companies is suffering from post-traumatic stress because their social hierarchy is being constantly changed. One Oxford professor, Robin Dunbar, who studies the social lives of monkeys, has drawn some conclusions he believes apply to human groups. They're called Dunbar numbers and treats intimacy as a limited and essential quality of all healthy social groups. Here are the numbers, and I'll leave you to work out the implications for what this means for how your organizations achieve socially healthy organizational life. 7 refers to the maximum number of people you can have as really good friends. 18 refers to the number that you can have close friendships with. And 125 refers to the number who you can have as your social network, who will respond to emails, texts, and so on. You can change who is in which group, but you can't expand the size. 4th focus, containing anxiety. Much OD work creates anxiety. You've been tasked to drive change, disrupt social bonds, impose an external reality on people. Imposed change generates anxiety. Changes in hierarchy and relationships at work generates anxiety. Family life generates anxiety. Climate change, terrorism, financial insecurity generates anxiety. As OD professionals, we know we need to know how to contain anxiety and not pretending it doesn't exist. And we need to know when we're provoking too much and when we need to step back. Lastly, hearing different points of view. You will have heard lots of talk about people living in bubbles. Internet search engines tailor what they tell you and us to fit with our prejudices. Socially, we seek out people who are like us. The more senior we are, the more we will be told what we are willing to hear. Most people who will bring in a different point of view are ignored or fired. As Charles Handy noted, the world may admire the truth-tellers, but few want to employ them. To finish, I will tell you what I see as the priority skills for the new OD. You need to become good at creating places of safe uncertainty, where people can make sense of their experience in the company of others without fear of being judged, where confidentiality is taken seriously, where the focus is on seeking to understand and not rush to action, where what matters is learning, not performing. Secondly, being good at holding up the mirror to the reality of what is. OD professionals need to be very skilled at telling powerful people things they may not want to hear. Thirdly, being good at encouraging self-expression. OD professionals need to be skilled at getting people to open up, to say what they really know, not what they feel is safe or politically useful to say. Lastly, as OD professionals, you need to be very good at not being seduced by loud and certain management consultants and business school professors. You must trust your own intelligence and in those of the intelligence around you. Trust to the quiet voices. Trust to your doubt. And the new OD does already exist. If you want to know what to do differently and what to keep the same, I strongly recommend this book, The Change Doctors Reimagining Organizational Practice. I am biased because I am one of the editors. It's based upon the actual practice of OD professionals who have completed the Ashridge Doctorate in Organizational Change. And I know it works in Turkey because Alpa has his doctorate from that. In conclusion, the new DNA of OD is about living with many truths about ourselves and the world. These many truths include truth being both objective and subjective, truth being something that is thought and felt, truth being both formal and informal, truth being both polite and rude, truth being both organizational and personal. We need to embrace all of this complexity and let go of the belief in the right way. That is the heart of the new DNA of OD.